Welcome to Vale of Dread, horror stories, where legends breathe and shadows speak. If you dare to walk with me through Europe's most terrifying tale, The Woman in White, make sure you subscribe, because the horror only deepens from here. The Woman in White, the Forest Road of Black Forest, Germany. The Black Forest in Germany has always been a place wrapped in myths and whispered warnings. Tourists today wander its trails with cameras, but locals, those who've lived near the towering pines for generations, know the older stories. They talk about a presence on the old road that cuts deep into the forest, a woman dressed all in white. Travelers who encounter her often wish they hadn't. Some see her as a spirit searching for something lost, others as a vengeful ghost punishing the living for sins of the past. It was on a cold October night when Lucas, a delivery driver, learned that legends can step out of shadows and into reality. Lucas had driven the Black Forest Road many times. It was faster than the highways, and though the path was narrow and often shrouded in fog, he preferred the solitude. That night he had taken one last delivery into a village on the edge of the forest. It was late, past midnight, when he turned back onto the winding road. His headlights cut through the mist, catching only glimpses of the thick trees pressing in on both sides. The silence inside his van was heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of branches shifting in the wind. Lucas tapped the steering wheel nervously, aware that the fog had grown unusually thick. He slowed down. His GPS flickered once, the screen going black before rebooting, as though even technology refused to guide him through that place. And then he saw her. At first he thought it was a trick of the headlights, a pale blur standing at the edge of the road. But as his van rolled closer, the blur sharpened into the figure of a woman. She stood barefoot on the gravel, her skin ghostly pale against the dark backdrop of the forest. Her long white dress clung to her as though it were damp, and her black hair spilled down in tangled strands, hiding parts of her face. Lucas hit the brakes. The van screeched to a halt, just a few meters away from her. His heart hammered. She wasn't moving. She wasn't even shivering in the cold night air. Are you okay?" he called through the rolled-down window, his voice trembling. The woman's head tilted slightly, as if considering him, and then she stepped forward. Every instinct screamed at Lucas to drive away, yet he stayed frozen, his hands gripping the wheel. She walked slowly, almost gliding, until she stood directly in the beams of his headlights. Her face came into full view now, pale skin, hollow eyes that seemed both empty and endless, and lips parted as if she were whispering words he couldn't hear. Lucas swallowed hard. She looked lost, fragile even. Against reason, he opened the passenger side door. "Do you need a ride?" The woman in white turned her head toward him, her empty eyes locking on his. And in that moment, Lucas felt something slam into his chest, an invisible weight pressing down on him, crushing the breath from his lungs. His vision blurred, but before he could panic, the pressure vanished. She climbed silently into the passenger seat. The air turned icy cold. Lucas's hands shook as he put the van in motion. Where do you need to go?" he asked, voice cracking. The woman said nothing. She only lifted one hand, pointing straight ahead into the forest road. Her long fingers were unnaturally thin, almost skeletal. He drove on, every mile heavier than the last. The fog thickened, wrapping the van like a shroud. Lucas glanced nervously at his passenger. She hadn't moved. Her head was tilted down, hair covering her face, but he could feel her gaze burning into him. Finally, she whispered. The sound was faint, raspy, yet it filled the van as if spoken directly into his ear. Turn. Left. Lucas obeyed instantly, though he knew the road well and was certain there was no left turn. Yet as his headlights cut through the fog, a narrow dirt path appeared, one he had never noticed before. Against all reason, he followed it. The path grew rough, branches scraping against the van's sides. Lucas's gut twisted with dread. "Where are we going?" he asked. But the woman didn't answer. Then after a few more minutes, she lifted her head. Her face was clearer now in the dim glow of the dashboard. Tears streaked her cheeks, though her expression was void of life. She raised her hand again, pointing toward a clearing up ahead. Lucas pulled the van to a stop. The woman turned her head to him, her lips moving again, whispering something too soft to understand. He leaned closer, straining to hear. That was when her face twisted. Her hollow eyes widened, her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, and a voice like a scream and a sob combined filled the van. "Leave this place!" The van's lights flickered, the engine sputtered, and Lucas's scream joined hers. He slammed the gas pedal, reversing back down the dirt path as branches clawed at the van. His passenger had vanished. The seat was empty, but the cold lingered, pressing against him. When he finally burst back onto the main road, the fog began to thin. Lucas didn't stop driving until he reached his home, shaking and pale, refusing to look in the mirrors. The next day, determined to prove it had been nothing more than exhaustion and imagination, Lucas retraced the road in daylight. He found no dirt path, no clearing, no evidence of where he had gone. Yet when he opened the passenger side door of his van, his blood ran cold. The seatbelt was fastened, as if someone had been riding there all night. Locals say the woman in white is the spirit of a betrayed bride who died on that road centuries ago. She waits for travelers, in the mist, guiding them to her grave or warning them away from her eternal sorrow. Some leave unscathed, others vanish without a trace. And if you ever find yourself driving the Black Forest Road after midnight, remember Lucas's story. If you see her, don't stop. The woman in white, the Château of Mourning, France deep in the French countryside, far from the bustling cities and sunlit vineyards, stands a forgotten château. Its towers rise like broken teeth against the horizon, windows shattered, walls crawling with ivy. Locals keep their distance, crossing themselves when its name is mentioned. They call it Le Château de la Femme Blanche, the castle of the woman in white. The legend goes back centuries to a young noblewoman named Elise. She was said to be the daughter of a wealthy lord, promised in marriage to a man she despised. Her heart belonged to another, a soldier who swore he would return for her. But before he could, Elise was forced to marry. On the night of her wedding, she vanished. Some say she threw herself from the tower. Others whisper that her husband, enraged by her refusal, locked her away until death claimed her. Whatever the truth, Elise never left the chateau. Her spirit, clothed in her wedding gown, became the eternal mistress of the ruins. Adrien, a student of folklore and history, had always been fascinated by such stories. During a summer research trip, he decided to test the legend himself. His professor had warned him, "Respect the old tales, Adrien. They carry more weight than you think." But Adrien brushed it off as superstition. Armed with only a flashlight, a notebook, and his camera, Adrien arrived at the chateau one evening. The sun had barely set, the sky painted in bruised purples and fading gold. The gates hung rusted and crooked, and as he pushed them open, the groan of metal echoed like a warning. The air inside was colder, unnaturally so, as if the ruins themselves exhaled frost. He walked through overgrown courtyards, past fountains choked with weeds, until he reached the grand staircase leading into the Château's main hall. His footsteps echoed against cracked marble floors, and cobwebs shivered in the draught. It was beautiful, in a tragic way. Portraits of stern nobles hung askew on the walls, their painted eyes following him. The ceiling was half collapsed, moonlight spilling through to reveal dust swirling in the air. Adrian snapped a photo, jotting down notes about the architecture. That was when he heard it, the faint sound of sobbing. He froze. It came from deeper inside, soft but unmistakable. A woman's sorrowful cry, echoing faintly through the hall. His first thought was that it had to be another trespasser, maybe even a prank. But curiosity pushed him forward. The sobbing grew clearer as he entered what must have once been the ballroom. Tall windows stood shattered, draped with decayed curtains that stirred though no wind touched them. A grand chandelier lay broken on the floor, her crystals scattered like frozen tears. And there, at the far end of the ballroom, stood a figure. She was dressed in white. Adrian's breath caught. The gown was unmistakably old-fashioned, its lace yellowed with age, the hem torn and dirtied. The woman's long dark hair fell in tangled waves, her head bowed as she wept silently. "Madame?" Adrien called softly. The woman stopped sobbing. Slowly, with a painful grace, she lifted her head. Her face was pale, her eyes black, voids reflecting no light. When her gaze met his, Adrian's legs went weak. Before he could run, she moved. Not walking, gliding. Her figure seemed to blur, as though she were both there and not there. Within moments, she stood only feet from him. "You should not be here," she whispered, her voice like a sigh carried on the wind. Adrian stammered. I came to study, to understand your story." Her lips parted in something between a smile and a grimace. "My story is written in blood. Do you wish to share my fate?" Adrian took a shaky step back, but his heel caught on the broken chandelier. He fell hard, pain shooting up his back. When he looked up again, she was gone. The hall was empty. His flashlight flickered, sputtered, then died. Panic rose like bile in his throat. He scrambled to his feet, shining the dim glow of his phone's light around the room. The portraits on the walls seemed closer, their painted faces distorted by shadows. Then a whisper brushed his ear. "Stay!" Adrian spun around, but no one was there. The air grew icy, his breath visible. And from the corner of his eye, he caught her again, standing in the doorway now, her face obscured by her veil. Against all reason, Adrian raised his camera. The shutter clicked. For a brief second, the flash illuminated the entire ballroom. And in that blinding moment, he saw her clearly. Elise, in her wedding gown, her eyes hollow pits, her mouth open in an eternal scream. The flash faded. The room was empty. Adrian bolted, his footsteps echoing through the corridors as he fled. He didn't care about his notes or his research anymore. Survival was all that mattered. He reached the staircase, racing down the cracked steps, when the sobbing returned, louder, closer, following him like a second heartbeat. At the front gates, he stopped only once to glance back. The chateau loomed silent and dark. But in one of the shattered windows of the ballroom, he swore he saw her, standing, watching, her veil lifted just enough to reveal her void-like gaze. Adrian didn't stop running until he reached his car. His hands shook as he fumbled with the keys, finally roaring down the dirt path away from the ruins. Only when the chateau disappeared from sight did the sobbing fade. The next day he looked at the photo he had taken. His stomach turned cold. The ballroom was empty, except for a blurred white figure standing just behind him, her hand reaching for his shoulder. Adrien never spoke of the experience publicly, but his friends noticed he never returned to the subject of folklore. His notes on La Femme Blanche ended abruptly with a single line scribbled across the page. "She is real. Do not go back." In France, tales of the woman in white still echo, tied to betrayal, heartbreak, and restless spirits. They say she wanders the ruins of her home, seeking justice she will never find. And if you ever find yourself near a forgotten château at night, and hear the sound of sobbing through broken windows, don't go inside. The Woman in White. The Carpathian Curse. The Carpathian Mountains are vast, stretching through several countries in Eastern Europe, their slopes blanketed in dark forests and mist. For centuries, they have been the cradle of legends, of wolves, vampires, and restless spirits. But among the oldest, whispered by shepherds and travelers, is the tale of the White Lady of the Carpathians. They say she appears on mountain passes when the fog is thickest, luring wanderers from the path. Some never return. Those who do are never the same, their eyes hollow, their voices trembling when they try to describe her. Marek, a young hiker from Poland, had heard the story since childhood. His grandmother used to warn him, "Never follow the woman in white, Marek. She belongs to the mountains, and if you chase her, you will never come back." He had laughed then, dismissing it as superstition. But now at 25, eager for adventure, he had set out alone to trek one of the Carpathian trails at night, something few dared to do. It was a foolish dare he had made to himself, born of pride and arrogance. With a backpack, a headlamp, and a phone for navigation, Marek began his climb. The first few hours were uneventful. The moon was bright above the peaks, and the crisp air smelled of pine and earth. But as midnight approached, a heavy mist rolled down the slopes. The path blurred, trees becoming towering shadows. Marek's lamp beam grew weaker, as though the fog swallowed the light itself. Still, he pressed on. He told himself it was nothing, that he would soon reach the cabin he had marked on his map. But then, he saw her. At first, she looked like a trick of the fog, a pale silhouette drifting ahead on the trail. But as he squinted, the figure sharpened. It was a woman. She wore a long white dress that shimmered faintly in the moonlight, though the hem was tattered and dirty from the stones. Her hair, dark and heavy, hung loose down her back. She walked barefoot, her steps silent. Marek froze. His grandmother's warnings rang in his ears. The woman turned slightly as though sensing him. Her face was pale, almost luminous, with features too perfect, too still. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Then she beckoned. A simple gesture of her hand, elegant yet unnatural, as if her fingers bent too far. Marek's breath quickened. His rational mind told him to stay put, to ignore the apparition, but his legs moved of their own accord, carrying him forward. Every step seemed lighter, as though he were in a dream. She led him deeper into the fog. The path twisted, unfamiliar, but he no longer cared. His eyes never left her. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only the mountains, the mist, and her pale figure ahead. Finally she stopped. They stood at the edge of a cliff, the valley yawning below like a black void. Marek blinked, disoriented. He had wandered far off the trail. The woman in white stood only a few feet away, her back to him. When she turned, her smile widened. Her eyes, once dark, now glowed faintly, like embers buried in snow. She raised her arms, beckoning him closer. "Come to me," she whispered. Her voice was soft, melodic, yet heavy with something darker. Marek stumbled forward, as though hypnotized. But just before he reached her, a sudden gust of wind tore through the cliffside. It carried with it a sound, faint but clear, his grandmother's voice. "Never follow the woman in white, Marek." The trance shattered. Marek blinked, heart pounding, realizing how close he was to the edge. The woman's expression twisted in that instant. Her beautiful features stretched grotesquely, her smile splitting unnaturally wide, her eyes hollow black voids. With a scream that was both human and inhuman, she lunged toward him. Marek stumbled backward, tripping on loose rocks. His headlamp flickered, casting her distorted shadow across the fog. For a moment she hovered at the cliff's edge, her arms reaching, her scream echoing like thunder. And then she vanished. The fog thinned as suddenly as it had come. Marek found himself alone on the cliff, trembling, sweat freezing on his skin despite the cold. Somehow he managed to find his way back to the trail. By dawn he staggered into the mountain village, pale and shaking. The locals knew without asking. One of the old shepherds placed a hand on his shoulder and said only, "You saw her, didn't you? The White Lady? Be glad you lived to tell it." Marek never returned to the Carpathians. He never hiked at night again. And though he told his story only once, to a close friend, he carried the memory forever. The pale figure, the beckoning hand, the cliff's edge. Some say the woman in white is the ghost of a young bride who was betrayed and murdered on her wedding night. Others believe she is older, a spirit of the mountains themselves, luring mortals to their deaths to feed on their souls. Whatever she is, the Carpathians keep her secret well. But if you ever walk the mountain passes in the fog and see a pale woman ahead of you, remember Marek's story. Don't follow, don't listen, turn back, because once she smiles at you, it may already be too late.